Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Jamf After Dark Podcast, a podcast to introduce you to the excellent people of Jamf and keep you up to date with what is new, exciting, and with managing Apple devices. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about every Mac admin's favorite topic, scripting. So, where do you start? What do you do with the random script you found on the internet? What the heck is a Z shell anyway? I'm your host, Kat Garbist, joined by Katie English and our guest, Armin Briegel. Katie, say hello.
Hello, and welcome back to our Jamf After Dark listeners. We are super happy to be here after our brief holiday hiatus. And Armin, thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Awesome. So you are relatively new to Jamf, but you have been a fixture in the Mac admin community forever, years and years. Heard your name forever, read your blog forever. And many of our listeners have bumped into your blog while researching how to solve their own problems. Can you tell us about that blog and how it got started?
So the blog's name is Scripting OS X for those who haven't encountered it yet. That's OS X as in OS X because that's what Mac OS used to be called, and I'm just too lazy to mess around with the domains and change that. I actually started that in 2010 after I'd left Apple, because as an Apple employee, at least back then, it might have changed since then, you were kind of discouraged from communicating too much outside of the company. And I thought, no, I have something to say. And there were great people out there like Rich Troughton and Greg Nagel, Ben Toms. There was the AFP 548 weblog website. Not sure what that was, but it was something like that. And I thought, this is awesome. I profit so much from these people. I should share what I know. And my goal in the beginning was to post something interesting about once a month. That doesn't sound too challenging, too much. You think once a month. I consistently failed that goal for the first 5 years of the blog. I mean, the archives are there, and you can check it out. There were a few nice posts that actually still bubble up in Google every once in a while. But I did not post once a month. Maybe 2 or 3 times a year if I was good in the beginning. That changed in 2015, 2016, when we moved back from the States to Europe. And because my wife is a professor and she was working spent lots of hours working at the university, setting up her new lab and her new position there. And I stayed home kind of taking care of everything. Didn't work full time for a while, but I still wanted to do something on the side. And that's when I started writing the books. And writing the weblog while I was writing the books, it sounds kind of contradictory, but it actually helped. You know, sometimes you write parts of the book that don't fit inside, or you just have to practice or try out writing about something, and then it doesn't go in the book, so it goes on the weblog. And that was a good double thing that I could do. And so the weblog became more and more popular the more you post. Who would have thought?
How many books are we talking now?
I published my 5th book last year. The last one was macOS Terminal and Shell, which is actually the thing that I'd kind of been building up to with the other books. It introduces how to use the terminal interactively, and then that, of course, is kind of a prequel to the actual book that I've wanted to write ever since I started, which is the macOS scripting book that is half written on my hard drive somewhere, but I have to find the time to finish it.
All that free time that you definitely have.
Yes, definitely. Exactly.
I love it. So it sounds like you've got, instead of just one project, you have 2 projects where you have the blog on your website and you also have the books you've been writing.
Well, yeah, the blog is nice because, you know, you can write something, a few hundred words. It doesn't have to be long or it doesn't have to be short. And just something you came across and you think, oh, this is worth sharing, and you can put it on the blog. It doesn't need much preparation. It doesn't need much editing. That's kind of a nice thing. And I know that in the beginning, when you start working on writing, you have this idea that it has to be perfect, but, you know, it's a weblog. most people won't see it anyway. Google will pick it up eventually, and it always picks up the weirdest things that you didn't expect. So yeah, the books, on the other hand, they go much deeper. They get more research. I have some volunteers who help me edit it, and that's a different kind of level of project. And of course, the books there's something that you can read from A to Z. I try to make them both that you can search in them and just read a chapter or a few pages, but I also try to make them that something that builds up, that you can read them from the first to the last page and have something that works together kind of as a story.
So can you tell us a bit more about, you've become this expert, right, on scripting and Mac OS. Can you tell us a bit about your technical origin story? How did you learn so much about scripting? I'm curious to know kind of the superhero origin story here.
So I was lucky in the sense that I grew up in the 80s, and that was just the time when computers became affordable and accessible enough for everyone, but they were still complicated enough that you actually had to learn at least the basics of programming or scripting or something around that to actually make them do what you wanted to. And that had me hooked from the very beginning. I'm sure many people from my age have that same story. I grew up in Germany, so it wasn't an Apple II. It was a Commodore 64, and then later a PC, and I didn't get into the Macintosh Apple sphere until the early 90s, actually. But once I had met the Macintosh and saw that, I was hooked. It was great. And the first Macintosh I owned myself was a PowerBook 160, which I lugged around, and the battery would last nearly 2 hours. It was awesome.
If we follow this journey, you started in the 80s, you started with scripting, and then now we're kind of following along. What happened? So you just joined Jamf, actually, mid-pandemic. Can you tell us what you're doing prior to Jamf and kind of more about your role here? Bit of a two-part question, but would love to kind of dig a little deeper on the evolution of your career and expertise.
Yeah. So I worked at Apple for a while as a systems and consulting engineer in Germany and the US. Then I worked at University of Southern California in Los Angeles as a sysadmin. And that's when, for me, the scripting and automation that I'd been dabbling with all the time during my professional career. But that's when it became really important for me, because I was the Mac admin responsible for hundreds of iMacs, and we were actually dual booting them and managing them with, back then we called it Casper, what turned into Jamf Pro. And so automation was my friend, because I was the person responsible. The more I automated, the less work I had. And I am lazy by nature. I think most of us are. So you put in more effort into the automation, and then life gets easier. And in higher education, or in most education, you always get in the summer break and then in the spring break, you get these, back then, imaging cycles where it's really stressed out, everything has to work. But then in between, you have kind of lulls where there's stuff to do, support to give, but you also have time to prepare the next cycle. And I used that to automate what I could. And that's when the stuff I knew about scripting, I could really deepen that and figure things out, and also start sharing it back into the community. And that's when I started giving talks again as well. So now that I'm at Jamf, I'm a consulting engineer, implementation, which is a team that exists worldwide. We have people in the US, in Australia, and in Europe, or the EMEA region as it's called within Jamf. And there are 3 of us here in EMEA, and our job is to help customers and the sales team with really complicated things. Like if there's a customer who says, oh, Jamf would be awesome, we wish it did this, then the consulting engineers are pulled in, and we try to figure out if we can do this and we can make it work. And it requires a lot of automation. Jamf Pro and all the products, the other products that Jamf has by now, they're very extensible. They have APIs. We can integrate them with systems from other companies, like from Microsoft or Okta or whatever. And make it work and try to find the workflows that fulfill the need that this customer has.
I think we should change your title to Jamf Guru, personally. That's just me, but...
Armin, it is awesome to have such a visible community contributor with us on the team. And I kind of want to dig into some of your scripting expertise. I resonate a lot with your story because I was also an admin in higher ed and built a lot of tools for automation and also just tools to share with other folks, operational team members across the campus so that they could do things and not have to actually log into a web console and stuff like that. So given our mutual history, I'm curious what you think about this. Do you see scripting as more or less of a job function for an Apple admin in the future?
So that is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about because, yes, I invest in this with my books and my talks and my job. And I would say like 5 years ago, 2015, 2016, there was this real concern that Apple would shut down macOS in a way that iOS is shut down. We have no on-device scripting on iOS, except for the Shortcuts app, which is nice, but not what we admins need. And there was this real concern going around, and it was kind of justified. Apple was signaling some things that you could interpret that like they wanted to lock down macOS. I don't know what changed within Apple, but they didn't go through with it. And the signals we've been getting over the last few years is that they won't change that on macOS. macOS is special because it is somewhat more open and flexible, and because of that powerful than the iOS devices. So I believe that at least for the next few years to come, scripting will still allow us to do these things that Apple can't do, that Apple can't anticipate that we need as administrators. It will remain this glue code that will just make this magic happen in the automation that maybe only you thought of and nobody else, which can be really, really nice. What I am seeing right now, though, and especially in the requests that I'm getting, is a shift, not necessarily away from the client scripting, but client scripting remains important. But in addition to that, with all the cloud services we have, and I've mentioned the identity providers, the security tools, and Jamf Pro, which is hosted in the cloud most of the time now as well, we need a different kind of scripting to glue those pieces together as well. And so we have the APIs and we have JSON files zooming back and forth, and we have to react with them and use webhooks and all of these things. And it's different languages that you use. You probably use Python or maybe PowerShell as well as Bash and Z Shell scripting, which is kind of interesting. I'm enjoying that. It's something new. Learning something new has always been something that I enjoyed. So that's great.
So maybe we change his title to The Glue That Holds Everything Together.
Yeah, I always like calling it glue code because that's what it does. It keeps things together.
I've just progressed to Jamf Jedi Master. That's another option. We can talk to HR about that.
Definitely.
I will definitely get back to that.
Renegotiate. Okay. So if I'm a system administrator and I'm trying to dig into all of the possibilities of scripting, what's the most important command that in my arsenal? How do I kind of, what's the multi-purpose tool that actually lets me get a lot of things done?
So the most important command, and this will be incredibly obvious, is the man command, which, of course, for most commands on macOS will give you a very detailed description of what it does. It's annoying because usually the command that you're really interested in is one of the few ones that doesn't have a man page, but most of the commands on macOS have a man page and you can get it. And I mean, even I open the man pages all the time because Unix commands are very inconsistent in how they work, and it's really hard to memorize everything. And there's like close to 1,500 commands on macOS pre-installed, and that's not mentioning all the interesting additional tools that you can install and use as well.
Well, building off that then, how do you find new commands that you might not know how to use?
Well, Yes, I think that's an excellent question. And most of the time, I don't find them myself because if you don't really know what you're looking for, that's really hard. But in discussions on the MacAdmin Slack or Jamf Nation, you usually will see somebody else using a command that you don't know. And then, we're all pressured for time. But if you have the time, then don't just gloss over it, but look at that command, learn what it does, see if it has other options. Especially on macOS, there are some commands that do a lot of things, and you see them used in one case, but they can also be used in many other situations. So if you stumble across a command that you don't know that way, it's worth digging into it and seeing what else can this command do. Can I use this in different contexts? And then either you have a good documentation system for yourself. I use the Notes app on macOS. Make a note. This is an example using this command in this context. And if you're lucky and get the keywords right in your description, you will find it again in even in years to come. Which, of course, if somebody knows how to do that consistently, I would like to know, because I'm struggling with that too.
Maybe changing gears a little bit too. So what's maybe a cool tip you've learned recently that you would love to share with listeners, or something that you think that they could better, something that's helpful?
So there is something that I learned recently, which I think has been in macOS for a long, long time, and many listeners can gloat now because they say, oh, I've known this for a long time. I didn't. I just learned this a few weeks ago. There's this tool called Keychain Access, which stores your passwords in macOS and syncs them to your iOS devices and everything. And when the auto fill in for the password doesn't work, then you open that and look for the password, and then you double click the password and you copy out the password. If you're in the list, you don't have to double click the item to open it. You can get a context menu with a right two finger or control click. And then there's an option that says copy item to keychain or copy password to keychain. And it saves you like 5 or 6 clicks.
My mind is blown right now. I had no idea, and I literally just opened my keychain. That is amazing. Worth the price of admission.
But I have a second thing here, because we're talking about scripting and terminal. I have recently also discovered that GitHub has a command line tool that you can download and install. It's called GitHub. And that has been so helpful for my workflows when I work with Git and GitHub that if you're in that area, check it out. My mind has been blown by discovering that too.
Awesome. Okay, so you've alluded to this a little bit in regard to Apple has changed their direction over time. And every once in a while, they will be pretty explicit about, hey, that command you're using, maybe don't use that. But if I'm an admin and that command helps me and technically I can still use it, what should I do?
So this is something that is on many Mac admins' mind right now, as in the beta for 12.3, which is in beta as we're recording this. If you're listening to this from the future, I hope you'll remember that time. And in the beta for 12.3, Apple is removing the built-in Python binary, which, of course, many people and many Mac admins use. And you may not even be aware that you're using it, because there are many one-liners that people use in scripts to determine something that you might have copy-pasted in from somewhere that use this Python binary. This will be removed in 12.3, and your scripts will break if you do that. The thing is, this shouldn't come as a surprise, because the Python organization has been warning that this particular version of Python will be end-of-lifed originally it was meant to be 2018, and then it slipped, and finally it was in January 2020. And Apple has been warning about this since the betas for Catalina, so for 2.5 years. And people have talked about this at conferences on their weblogs, including myself, saying, hey, look, we have to have a plan for what to do with Python. Which I think is the first thing that you need to do as a Mac admin or Apple admin in general, is it is part of your job to stay informed about what's going on. And these things can be easily missed. Apple usually doesn't make a big fanfare about them, but there will be a tech support article or a mention in the release notes, which are huge. And I mean, I don't go pour through them line by line to see if there's anything interesting. Sometimes I stumble across something, but most of the time I notice it because somebody else starts talking about it. And then we, again, have the things like the Jamf Nation Mac Admin Slack, where these things get amplified, thankfully, so that we all hear about it. But it's part of our job as admins to know what's going on and to kind of be on top of that. If Apple says something like that, I don't think there's a need to panic immediately. In this case, we had 2.5 years, which I think is the fastest I've ever seen Apple go from officially making a notice to actually removing it. It's kind of painful that it's in a minor update, which means that the time for testing is much shorter than if they did it, for example, for macOS 13. But yeah, we've been warned. We have to work with that. There are still, and we see that and hear that, there are still several third-party installers and tools that use this binary and that will break. So in this case, you have to locate them. And Monterey throws up a really nasty warning dialog if that happens, which is good for us as the admins, because then we can determine what it was and tell the vendor and say, hey, have you fixed that? Is there an update? Or will you be able to fix this in time? So these are things that we have to be on top of. And I think the most important thing is to be aware of what's going on and to be in touch with the community, because somebody else will figure out the solution.
And the solution might be package up your own Python and distribute it, right?
Well, that's definitely a great solution. And tools like AutoPackage and Monkey are doing exactly that, which is a great solution. But honestly, if there weren't other great people in the community who had written up how to package your own Python, I wouldn't know how to do that. So I'm really grateful that there are smarter people than me out there who tell me what I need to do, or actually build a package that I can just download and use in my Jamf and distribute it that way.
The power of community. So speaking of, there are a ton of scripted workflows out there on GitHubs and blogs like yours, and you mentioned a few other really important blogs out there in the internets. What would you say are some important things for admins to consider before they just copy paste, just blast that into my Jamf Pro and deploy it to all my computers? What would you say are the most important things for admins to think about there?
So yes, one thing that's so great about the Mac admins community is that there's real willingness to share. And a lot of people are sharing this stuff, and that is wonderful. But no matter how awesome the code is that you copy and paste off a GitHub page, if it doesn't work, or if it doesn't work the way you expect it's supposed to work, in the end, it is your responsibility and not that person out there who created that code. So whatever you take from the internet, you have to at least read and try to understand, and that's where the man page and everything else comes back in, because you may not understand all of it, but you can work your way through it. And then, of course, and that's the same as if you copy-paste it from the internet, or if you write it yourself, you have to test, and test again in sandbox environments, in test environments, and then maybe to a handful of users before you roll it out to everyone. That's just prudent and should be common sense. But I know what the real world is like, and sometimes you're under time pressure and other things, and then that falls overboard, but it will bite you in the end very badly in some situations, and I speak from experience. And this is not necessarily to protect yourself against somebody sneaking in bad code in their superscript, but people make errors, and your environment may be different than theirs, and the script might run into edge cases and errors that they never encountered. And that's the most important thing you have to protect yourself from, is your environment will be different, even if you're both using Jamf and both using the same version of macOS. But yeah. The other thing I always check out when I find something that looks useful is if there's a date attached to it. Because if it's from 6 months ago, it's probably good. If it's from 2 years ago, probably still okay, but macOS changes. If it's from 5, 6, 7 years ago, some things still work that are 5, 6, 7 years old or older, but the chances get slimmer and slimmer.
It's a lot of good insight. For those listening, Katie and I did a lot of head nodding, and we both had smirks when Armin was talking about how sandboxing and testing should be common sense. So I hope you also played along and had similar sentiments, listeners. But
It's one of those things, the things that you remember were where you didn't test and then things went horribly wrong. When you test, it's boring work, but the good thing is you don't remember it later because usually nothing went wrong, or very few things.
Well, I don't know about you, but I have literally never made a mistake in any of my scripting. So I've had perfect experiences all my many years in IT. And wow, yeah, no, I've made some very memorable errors. So I can attest to the need for testing.
You learn most from mistakes, and in some situations, you learn a lot very fast.
when you make the mistake, it's a lot harder to fix it usually than it was to create the mistake, is what I've learned and experienced. So I don't really script that much, and I should probably read some of your books. And on that note, last, final, probably most important question. What is your favorite piece of Jamf or Apple merchandise?
So I'll start with the Jamf merchandise, and I got that at a conference a few years ago, and I don't remember which one, but Jamf was handing out small multi-tools with a carabine that you can clip on your keychain, and it has a bottle opener and a screwdriver, and it's just immensely useful to open things that are wedged in, or well, to open bottles, or because it has a small carabine on it, I can hook up other stuff to it, and it's been on my keychain ever since. So it's definitely the most used merch that I have. And the Jamf logo is still readable, which I think is amazing. My favorite, though, is I still have a working, mostly good shape WWDC 2000 computer bag, which was the first WWDC that I attended. And it was actually in storage with my parents, and I had forgotten about it for the 12 years that we lived in the States. And then when we moved back to Europe, they were glad to get rid of a bunch of boxes that had been standing around in their attic for years. And I pulled out that bag, and it was pretty much pristine and new, and I was so happy about it. And I've used it since then, and now it's starting to look a bit... So I'll have to have it restored somehow. But I'm really proud of that.
The WWDC merch, hard to beat. That's some good stuff.
Yeah, back then the bags, I remember at that developers conference, the bags came in different colors matching the iMac colors of the time. I got the green one.
That's so cool.
I also have, when macOS 10 was introduced in 2001, they did leather jackets with the blue X on the back. And I was able to trade for, because I didn't go to that particular developers conference, but I was able to trade for one later, though it's a one size too small for me, which is a bit annoying, but I'm keeping it somewhere for a museum or something.
Kat, do you have any good merch?
I don't have any dub merch, so if anyone wants to donate, accepting donations. And then as far as my Jamf swag, you mentioned the logo is still on your keychain. From JNUC, I think that had been JNUC 2015, perhaps, or 2016, maybe. It was a few years ago, but my 2020 JNUC beer glasses, the logo's already missing. So those are well loved, as well as what I said, and what came to mind when you're talking about your dub swag and my JNUC beer glasses. It's all just well loved.
Awesome. So Armin, it was an absolute pleasure chatting with you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks again for having me. I had a blast.
Wonderful. Thanks to all our listeners for tuning in to the Jamf After Dark podcast. If you'd like to send us fan mail and tell us about your own piece of favorite Jamf or Apple merch, drop us a note at podcasts@jamf.com. Stay safe out there and catch you next time.